We'll do a review in Likkutei Sichos in Chelek Chof, volume 20, the second Sicha for the Parshas Noach. And the Rebbe discusses here an interesting question. When we see the Torah says that the Mabul started when Noach turned 600, and then it says, and the Mabul lasted 1 year, and then the pasuk counts that after the Mabul, he lived for 350 years. So the problem is, if Noach was 600, and then he lived 350, 600 and 350 is 950. But there was 1 year that there was the Mabul, so it turns out he really lived for 951. So why does the Torah sum up the years of Noach as only being 950? What happened with the 1 year? He was 600 when the Mabul started. The Mabul took a year, so it's 601. He lived 350 after the Mabul, so that's 951. Why does the Torah say 950 total? It was 951, it would seem. And the Medrash says that the year of the Mabul doesn't count. But the Rebbe's question is, how come Rashi doesn't say anything about it? Seems to be very difficult. The Rebbe will explain that in Pashtus, that sometimes when we say 600, it doesn't mean at the end of 600 years. It means when he turned 600 in the 600th year. And the Rebbe makes a cheshbon here in different places how it would work, as we will see in the Sicha, so that the total number works. Aleph, Noach Aleph. Oifim Posik, v'Noach ben sheish meye shana, v'hamabul hoyamayim al ha'aretz. The Posik says Noach was 600 years old, and the Mabul was a flood on the earth. State in Medrash, so it is stated in the Medrash, Ashnas hamabul eina oila min haminyan. The Mabul year is not counted. When we say, when we total up the numbers, we don't count the year of the Mabul as a number. The Mefarshim Zogam, as the Mefarshim say, as der Mabul yor vert nit zugerechnet, that the year of the flood is not added lishnoisav shel Noach to the years of Noach, which means when we say how much Noach lived, we're not going to add that year that was the Mabul, Vimirzen. And then we see this. When Hashem counts Noach's years, the Eibishter doesn't count, the Mabul year is not counted. How so? Turns out when we calculate, we see that Noach lived 951 years im shnas hamabul. If we include the year of the Mabul, he lived 951. How do you get to the 951? Shekain hu oimer, because the pasuk says Noach ben sheish meye shana v'mabul hoya, that he was 600 when the Mabul came. Mashma, he was 600. Shamabul hoya la'achar sheish meye shana. It was already after he was 600, and that's when the Mabul came. Diksiv, as the pasuk says, "Vayhi ba'achas sheish meye shana goimer." And that because the pasuk says that it was Mabul was for a year. It says it was 601 years. Chorvu hamayim. That when Noach was 601, the water dried out. So that means, and that was a year later. Uksiv. But then we have another part. So there's a year, it was 600 plus 1. So it's 601. Uksiv. Uksiv Vayichi Noach. Achra Mabel Shloish Meis Gomer V'Chamishim Shana. He lived for 350 years. And then the pasuk says Uksiv. So how much was it in total? Vayi Kol Yimei Noach Asher Chai. All of the days of Noach that he lived was Shah Meis Shana. V'Chamishim Shana. It was 950 years. So Medrash says, you should have said 951 years, because the Mabul started at 600 years. 1 year till the Mabul finished and dried out, it was 601. And then he lived another 350. So his total years should be 951. Alma, we see She'ein Shnas Mabul Oila Leminyan Shnaisov. So this tells us that the years of the Mabul do not add up to the number of the years of Noach. How come it doesn't count, but it was a year? So the quoting the Medrash says, it was a year of a tzara, there was the Mabul. So it's not counted to him. It wasn't added the year of the Mabul to the number of years. Basically, he lived 950 good years and not this sort of year of the year of the Mabul. The Rebbe's issue is, this seems to be a problem in the very simple context of reading the pasuk. If he lived 600 years before the Mabul, and he lived 350 years after the Mabul, and the Mabul was for a year, you added it's 951. How come Rashi doesn't explain everything? I mean, in Rashi, this is not such a simple explanation that we don't count 1 year here. Why would we not count it? Shegeret kama pa'amim. So we said many times, the Rebbe says if Rashi has a problem, doesn't know the answer, he doesn't ignore it. He says, I don't know. As der fun was Rashi sagt bekam mekoymes bepirusha ala Torah, from the fact that Rashi says in several places in his commentary on the Torah, dem oizdruk, he expresses lo yodaiti, I don't know. The kayotzeboy are similar to that. Is muchach, that's evident as in jeden ort usis faran ashverikait, that in every place there is a difficulty in pshute shel mikra, in the simple meaning of the verse, vertes bavorn in Pirush Rashi. It is answered. Rashi addresses it, answers it in Rashi's commentary. Und dort, wo schreibt nicht kein Pirush. And if Rashi does not address it, he does not have a commentary. Und sagt nicht, and also he doesn't say lo yodaite, I don't know, it's very similar to it. Is das an inyan was is move on. So then it's a matter that it's self-understood. He doesn't have to address it because this is an obvious matter. Other from the pasuk, either in the verse itself, other from the ksuvim tzipirush Rashi lifnei pasuk zeh, or from the verses or Rashi's commentary from before that Rashi has already addressed other issues. So this question that would arise has already been answered, dealt with, and Rashi doesn't have to say it here. If he said that, so according to this premise, that Rashi had to either address it already, answered it, or it's obvious we don't need to address it, we have this question here. How are we going to answer this question? That those was there's sachakol because of from Noach's Yordan, the total amount in the Pasuk of years of Noach stimmt nicht mit Misper Shneisov shalifnei v'shalachrei hamabul. It does not fit. The math doesn't add up with the years he lived before and after the Mabul, which therefore tells us, if the total doesn't match up, this tells us that the year of the Mabul is not counted. But that forces us to say that the year of the flood is not counted, like the Medrash quoted before. So this problem is astira geluya bepashtus haksuvim. This is a very open contradiction in this simple verse, in the simple study of the verse. Rashi doesn't address this in his commentary on the Torah. How to reconcile this problem before Torah says he lived before the flood for 600 years. He lived the flood after the flood 350 years. The year was the flood. The Torah says his total years were 350 and not 351. They cannot zogen. We cannot say, maybe Rashi holds this, obviously, that we don't count that 1 year of the flood. Cannot zogen as Rashi held, that Rashi's opinion is, as bepashtus is nasa mabul einoilu min haminyan. That's simply said the year of the mabul does not count. It's something self-understood. Adarabah. Rebbe says no. On the contrary, this is achidush godel. This is something which is a great novelty. Or Rashi woltas gedacht schreiben beferisch. Rashi should have written this explicitly. Ubefrat, especially as in dem cheshben proti wird shnasa mabul yegerachend in the Torah. That considering the fact, the Rebbe says that when we talk about these detailed accounting, we do count the mabul. The Torah counts it as a year. Kinas Leil, as mentioned earlier, 3 years state. First, it says that the mabul otzuk ongeheben bishnas sheish meyes shon l'chayi Noach. It started at the 600th year of the life of Noach. Und der noch state, and then it says, Ba'achas v'sheish meyes shona, on the 101st year to Noach's life, goimer chorva hamayim, the water dried out. So the Torah gave it a year. We see the Torah give it. Torah counted as a year. And here all of a sudden we're saying it's obvious. No, we don't count the year. It can't be that way. Rashi doesn't accept that. So the Rebbe first tries to say now that maybe when we say the shnas shana doesn't mean when Noach turned 600, which means he went into his 601st year, but when it says in the year 600, it means in the year. That means he turned 599 entered into this 600th year. And the same thing would be when the flood dried out at the 601st, meaning not when he turned 601 years, it means when he was in the 600th year. But then when the Torah adds up how many full years did he live, it was only 950, not 951. Let's look inside. Base. Men kendos mevayer sein. We can explain this. In Posuk state bishnas sheish meyes shana l'chayi Noach koimer nivku. In the 600th year of the life of Noach, it split open the wells. Was der Pirush HaPoshut von Bishnas? What is the simple meaning in the year? Is in mitten dem Jahr. That would mean the middle of the 600th year. But may like and learn, and therefore we are able to learn as bishnas sheish meyes goymer nifku is given betchilas hashana. That was in the beginning of the year. Das heißt, as a reingehendig in dem Jahr 600 Lachayinech, when you entered in his 600 year, meaning after he turned 599, so you go into, he lived full 599 years, and when you entered into this sixth Bishnas Shmei Shmei Shana, das heißt, a reingehendig in dem Jahr 600 Lachayinech, when you enter into the 600 years of life in Noach, when there is alt given, that means what was his age? Tov Kuf Tzadik Tes, 599 Shana Mitamiktzas with a little bit more within the 600th year. Hatzich, ongoing der Mabel, that's when the flood started. On the Baal, the Pasik is Medayik. The Pasik says, Bishnas Sheish Meis Shana, in the 600th year, is das Machriach zu sagen. So therefore, this forces us to say that also in the other pasuk, as euch das was steht when the pasuk states, the Noach ben sheish meyos shana, which normally that would be interpreted that he turned 600, but because we know that the flood was in his 600th year, so when the pasuk says the Noach ben sheish meyos shana, that he was 600 years, v'mabul hoya mabul ala oretz, we will have to say, meint, when there is a Rhein in them 600, when he entered in the 600 year, other as meint kediuk loshna kosuv, v'mabul hoya loshon over. And the mabul hoya mean not as he entered the 600 years, but the mabul that started before was when Noach entered his 600th year. As when Noach is given a ben shen shmeyes shono, that when Noach was 600 year, is there mabul she given from freer that it was already from before. According to this second way that the Rebbe wants to say, so sheish meyes shono in the second pasuk will actually mean when Noach turned 600, he lived 600 years. But over there, the pasuk is not saying that that is when the mabul started. The Torah is saying the past, the mabul was already. That means the mabul was already in the year before 600. It was in his 599th year. So in the pasuk Bishnas Sheish Meyes clearly seems to tell us it was within the 600th year, which means he was in after turning 599. And in the second pasuk, either we're going to say that the Noach ben Meis Sheish Meis Shana means when he entered in his 600 years, which is not so pashut. And the Rebbe says, if you look specifically at the language, Itaka doesn't say that it started at the 600 years. It says that the 600 years, it means it was 600 years, and the Mabul was already there from before. And then likewise, what is the meaning of Kumekein in the Pasuk when the Pasuk says, "Vayhi ba'achas v'sheish meyes shana"? It was in the 601st year of Noach's life. Means within the 601st. Mean the 600. My maintenance need full of 600 and ein yor. It doesn't mean full 601 years. Nor in oneb. It means in the beginning of 601 year. 601. It means 601. 601 means not past 601, that you've completed 601 year, but you entered. That is when they dried out the water. This says 600 means 600 a little bit. So it turns out that the flood didn't start after Noach turned 600, but only while he was in his 600 years. That was after he turned 599. And it dried out not after he turned 601 full years, but as he entered in the 601st year. But when the Torah has to give the total years, how much did he live? So over there, we're talking about the complete years. It says 950. Then es kommt aber zum Sanchakel von Minyan Shneisov Shel Noach. But when it comes to the sum total of the years of Noach, how much he lived, read the Torah, so there the Torah talks about complete years. It doesn't count that partial year as a full year. Bemele kommt us, it turns out, as Shnei Chai in Noach, seinen 950 Shana. They're 950 years. How do you get the total of 950? Because he was 600 and a little bit. Because remember, the flood started when he was 599, a little bit. And it dried out when it was just 601, 600 a little bit, 601 and a little bit. It was just in the 600th year. So, but it was just 600 and a little bit, 600 mixing a little bit. So from his life, it was 600 and a little bit after the Mabel. Und 350 noch a Mabel, and 350 after the Mabel. So 600 and 350 is 950. Because that mixes is not counted. That was just in the pasuk. It says the year in which he entered, but not the total year. So doesn't seem to be such a shattering problem. So the Rebbe tries to explain how come Rashi doesn't have a problem, because the basic point is when it says that he was 600 years, so the Rebbe has two ways of saying it. Either 600 years means in his 600th year, even though that's not the usual, because the Torah tells us Bishnas Sheshmeis means within, that's in this 599th year when he turned into his 600th year. So therefore we have to change the meaning of over here when he says he was Noach ben Sheish Me'Yeshana, means he was in his 600th year. Or we're going to say that the pasuk says Hoyo, that it was before, but basically and after. Basically, the Mabul was when Noach was 600. It started when he was 599, complete 599 years. It ended when he was complete 600 years, but it wasn't a year, just when he 600 and something. And then he lived 350 years later. So together it's 950. So we don't have a problem with an extra year that the Rebbe quoted from the Medrash that has to say that that year is not counted. As the Medrash learns, it was full 600 years. There's a problem. But Rashi doesn't learn that way. That's the Rebbe suggests. But the Rebbe says, almost we have another Rashi, which seems to imply that he was actually 600 years old. He lived 600 years. And the Rebbe brings the Beers of Elchayrim. It must be this explanation seemingly is not sufficient. The Eibishter waited an additional 7 days before the Eibishter bring the flood. And Rashi says because the Eibishter waited for Mr. Shelach to first pass away, so he should not be by the flood. And Rashi says if you will take Liyom Shiva Goimer, if you wait another 7 days, you'll see that that is when Mr. Shelach passed away. Zogt Rashi. Rashi says like this: Tzei v'chashoiv shneisov shel Mishusalach. Go and calculate how old Mishusalach was. V'timtzo, and you will find Shem Kolim Bishnas Tofresh Shona L'chaye Noach, that they end at the on the year that Noach turned 600. Meshuselach died when Noach turned 600 years. Tofresh Shona L'chaye Noach. How do you see that? Rashi brings the cheshbon. What the cheshbon is? She doesn't bring it. What is the cheshbon? Meshuselach had gelebt sham me'ois v'shishim v'teisha shana. The pasuk said that he lived 969 years. And hayois, as Meshuselach is alt given kuv pei zayin shana k'shoili des lemach. Now we'll see when they give birth, the Torah says he was 187 when he gave birth to Lemach. Lemach is alt given kuf pei beis shana k'shoili des Noach. He was 182 when he gave birth to Noach. So Meshuselach was 187 when he gave birth to Lemach, and Lemach was 182 when he gave birth to Noach. Zusammen. So how much is the total of 187 plus 182? Shin Samach Tes Shona. 369 years. So when you add Kumtois, so it turns out as Snoisav Shel Meshuselach. So when Meshuselach was 969 years, Kolin Bishnas Tofrei Shona L'chaye Noach. They conclude when Noach was 600 years old. Because, very simple, as the Rebbe brings down, Tofreish und Shin Samach Tes, 669 is Tov Kuf Samach Tes, is 969. So Memela, Meshuselach died when Noach was 600 years old. Vibald as Mrs. Meshuselach is given Koidem HaBabel, since he died before the Mabul. Kumtuis, it turns out, as Bishnas Tofrei Shona L'chaye Noach Goimer Nivku, when it says that Noach was 600 years and the wells, all the wells split. It means after he was already 600 years old, because all of the numbers come that it's after he was 600 years old. So this seems to negate what we said before, that he was only 599 years old at the time, because then it wouldn't match up with the numbers in which Meshuselach died, which would be when Noach was, which was when Noach was 600 years old. It's not really such a strong question, the Rebbe says. When we say that he was gave birth when he was 107 years old or 182 years, it doesn't mean that on the day that he turned 187 or 182, that's the day they gave birth. That doesn't mean that. The Pashtus sollte man das gekannt verändern. Simply you can answer that. The Mispore Shonim, when jeder hat Meulid given, the number of years that each one gave birth to, as Benoi, his son, in this case, we say Kuf Pei Zayin. That's when Meshuselach gave birth to Lemach. The Kuf Pei Beis, 182, that's when Lemach gave birth to Noach. And same thing in all the other numbers. Meint es nicht, as in dem Tag, was is alt geworden, der Mispar from Jordan is Heilig, that on the day that he turned 187, or on the day that he turned 182, in all these cases, that's when he gave birth. If you say it like that, was levizeveto is coming, as sheis und enish, as soon as on the day shlachreim, and the following by Vemene state vaychi, he lived so many years vayeled. On that day, it was all on Rosh Hashanah because it started with Odom Arishem. Is jeder von sie geboren geworden genau demselben Tag, wenn sein Vater ist geboren geworden. They were each born on the day that the father was born. The Hainu, as is an alle geboren geworden, wie einmal das ist schon Odom. Odom Rosh Hashanah, they were all born on the day of birth of Rosh Hashanah. Because after, by each one, it says, Adam lived so many years, and he gave birth to his son. So that number of years means exactly when that number of years came about, that's when he gave birth, on the day. And then he gave birth to his son after living so many years. And we're going to say it means exactly on the day that he was born. So it turns out all these generations were all born Rosh Hashanah. Doesn't mean that. No, does mean. As Nogdem Hosem Gehad the Mispar Yorn, after they reached that number of years, is a meshach from them yor hilidu. So during that year that they turned 187, they turned 182, in that year they gave birth. And therefore it'll turn out. As we bald this kuf peizayin pun shon from Shusalach. Since the 187 years that Moshe Salach gave birth to Lemach, and the Kuf Pei Beis Shona from Lemach by Lidas Noach, and the 182 years of Lemach when he gave birth to Noach, Zainen mit Shirayim, there were leftovers. Doesn't mean he was only 187. Could have been 187 and a half. Could have been 182 and three quarters with extras. Is bitziruf from the shirayim. So when you add up those extras during the year that was left over, more than the mixas, from shnas tov rei shono l'chayi noyach, and also a little bit of the 600 years of the chayi noyach, kommt zusammen ois a ganzer Jahr. So then you have all these extra, gives you a whole full year. Was is mashlim shnoisov shel Mishur Salach. So that year would make Mishur Salach the year 969. Because we have all those extras that we didn't count before, so therefore he could be in the 969 year from Mishur Salach, and that would still not contradict that the the flood started in before Noach was 600 years. But the Rebbe, so basically, to give Mishur Salach the 369 years, we don't have to say that Noach was already 600 by the time of the flood, because the reason is 369. Noach was only 599 when the flood started in his 600th year, and still Mishur Salach was old already, 969 years because of all the extras. But the Rebbe has another problem with another Rashi. Bleibt aber nicht glattig, benegeya dem Chet von Deira Flogo. The sin, when the Deira Flogo, generation that was scattered. They built the tower. So Rashi says that the people said, so Rashi Amru, what the people were saying, Achas le'elef v'tofrej nun vov. They were saying, every 1,656 years, Shonim Horakia mismaited. The sky falters, and this flood comes, Kishem Sha'asa b'mei Mabul, just like he did the day of Mabul. The Mabul was 656 years from creation. Was der Cheshbon von Elevet Tofrej Nun Vav. 1,656 Shonim is der Sachakel von the Schneus Heuledes von the Ois gerechente Deure Shemodnum Va'ad Noach. That is the total, if you sum up, of all the birth of those that come, starting with Noach until you add all the years, you get 1,656. However, if we're going to explain, like we said before, as in the Mispore, that in the number of years there are leftovers that you don't count. It's not exactly in that date, but there's more. But oiskumen as by yederen from the asore deures. So it turns out by each one of the 10 generation is do an oide from a gewissen zman. There needs to be an extra. There's some extra because nobody gave birth on the day that they turned that age, but there was an addition then. Tag, Wochen, Chodoshim, maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe months. Was wird nicht gerechnet im Mispar HaKloli von the Shonim. That's not counted in the general number of the years. So when we say he lived 182, it doesn't include 182 and a half, or 182 in a month or a week. So logic dictates, it would seem, as b'meshach von Ha'atzorah Deire Sherichu Yomim, that during these 10 generations, which people had long lives, that all these extra should have collected more than the days than 1 year. Azoy as der Sachakel batreft, so then the total would not equal nit elevet tofrej nun vov shonim. It wouldn't be 1,656 here. Nor mer, it should be a little more. Elevet tofrej nun zayin shonim, 1,657 here. Since the Rebbe came up with this concept that even though it says a number of years, it doesn't really mean the numbers of years exact. It doesn't mean exact, but it means the year plus extra months. And therefore, the Rebbe explains that even though if you count the years, it doesn't match up to the 969 years that Meshuselach lived, but it's only matches up if we take the extra in consideration. So then if we need to add extras to our calculations, so how do we get 1,656? We should get 57 because those numbers should at least add it. But so maybe the Rebbe says, we're going to say that when we're counting the years here, we're not actually counting each individual, how much they lived. We're talking 1,656 years, the sky falters. Maybe it's talking about from world creation, 1,600, so we don't care about the specific numbers. And these numbers count by the years of the world. And therefore, it'll turn out that it's 1,656. And it seems like we could have learn. As der Sachakul Cheshben von Elef v'Tov Reish Nun Vav Shonim, that this total account of 1,656 years is Val Shnois HaNoshim Menuyin Leminyan Shnois Olam. The years of the people are counted in the years of the world. So whatever number, we don't go in to say how much that particular person lived. He lived 182 years. No, from the day he was born to the day he dies. When we said he lived 182 years, that's how much it's added to the years of the world since creation. 182, when he says that he lived such and such years and he gave birth, doesn't mean how much he lived, how many years he lived within the world. The world started on Rosh Hashanah and ends the end of the year in Elul. How many years in that changes? We don't go by the individual. Und man gekannt lernen, als der Sachakil von Elle V'Tovresh V'Shonim ist, weil Shnois HaNoshim Menuyim Leminyan Shnois Olam. Das schön Rashi in Parshas Kisis. Das heißt, als man zählt als Sachakil von Shnois HaNoshim, when we say the total of how much years a person lived, is this nicht Leut Zayde Yor. It's not how they lived. Nor Leut Shnas Olam, but it goes by the years of the world. So within the world year, it was the 182 years by the world, but it doesn't change by the individual. It's difficult that Rashi over here will accept that pirush. Over there, Rashi uses the legabe, the meraglim legabe, that's how it fits, but nicht schreiben the dos befedish, while he didn't write it explicitly. So that would be a great novelty to say that. As when Torah rechnet, Shneis Chayev von ein Menschen, the Torah counts a life of a person, meint man nicht seine Jahre noch Shneis Olam. We don't mean his life, but the years, how many years in the world he lived, not within the world, he lived 182 years of that the world moved, and that's the years we're talking about. So, Babir Baza. And the Rebbe says, Bechlal, when we say a number of years by a person, there is not an exact number. When we say somebody is a certain age, doesn't mean that he is exactly at that age. And therefore, it's different when the Torah says, I turned today a certain age versus an age. In derech hapshat, when Torah zogt as Pliny is alt kach v'kach yon, that this one is this is his age. Nit al derech haloshim, but it doesn't use the language. I am 120 today, meaning he turns 120 today. Meintes mispar shnoisav be'erech, just mean about, approximately. Meglech elter, possibly older. Aber weniger, that maybe in other words, he may be older, even to say a year, as long as it's not more than a half. Up to a half, you can still say that he's that year. Meglech elter, aber weniger mit halb Jahr. Cannot say older more than half a year because then it would be the next. Oder inger mit azazman. He may be younger with a half year, up to a half year. Saying that he's that age doesn't mean exactly. We're saying that's the age approximately. But with Pashtus is as linam basaruba ifunayor. Because simply we go by the majority. If he's almost 600, you'll say 600. If he's even 600 and something, we'll also say 600. Und damit ist noch mehr glattig der Cheshbon von 11 Tofrejen und Vovshonim. And this will even make it even easier to understand when we say 1,656 year. Because if we would assume the usual, one can accept and understand as kishem bezaini given as al just like some generations of bazei is do oide from yom, they lived additional. Torah doesn't count them, those extras, as we said. Azoy seine given as zelche, Rabbi is mechadish, but the search was bazei is der Cheson von Yomin Oichadoshim nit niker in Schum Hashonim v'shtein in Torah. The fact they were still missing, and the Torah gave them a number of years, and we didn't really. You can't tell that. No, it's okay. Azoy as besach hakel werde misper sich be'erech oizgleichen mit shneis olam, so that it will actually fit the years of the world, because the fact that there's extra, there's less. When the Torah mentions a number, it means approximately. The Rebbe, if it's more than half a year the previous year, we count them at this year. If it's less than a half a year more, it's as long as it's within half a year this side, half a year the other side. So that's why it'll come out to the number of 1,656, even though if you just had to be extra, it would be 57, as the Rebbe asked. So therefore, everything remains like the Rebbe said before, that Noach was only 599, and the flood ended when he was 600, and therefore, when we say that he lived for 950 years, includes all the years, all the life. The Rebbe explains another vav. It's not so pshat ubagdim. The tam bepashtus. What's the reason for vos Torah rechent ois by yederen from the Torahs? Why does the Torah count by each one's generation sein gil, beim Geburt von sein Sohn, how old he was when his son was born? What difference does it make how old he was when he gave birth? Is Kedemen soll wissen, that's in order for us to know when die verschiedenen Muros Torah haben passiert, when the various different happenings of the Torah took place. So according to the Mispar Hashonim, that the number of years which is written as far as when they were born is beikir zu losen wissen. It's mainly to tell us them genoyin minyan l'shnois olam, to know exactly the years of the world. Ken men zogen, so therefore we can say as der mispar hakosuv b'Torah, that the Torah's number b'yachas zu der elod of the mishprote, as it relates to a certain individual, can have man an unterschied from karge 2 year, may have a difference between approximately 2 years. Kemat dem ganzen Jahr, wenn darf alt werden kach v'kach shana, it can also be almost the entire year when he's going to turn that age. Let's say by Noach, 600, the entire year of 599 when he's going to be 600. Und Noach kemat dem ganzen Jahr, also almost the Mispar Yorn And the Rebbe gives a different example. The Dugma, Kuf Pei Zayin Shona in Posuk Kanal. We mentioned before 187 in Posuk Kanal. Vaychi Meshuselach Sheva Ushmoinim Shona Ume'as Shona. That Meshuselach lived for 187 years and he gave birth to Lemech. So Pasuk says, Ken meinen, wenn halt bitchilas shnas haknisa to Kuf Pei Zayin. That is the beginning to the year that is going to become 187. That is Kuf Pei Shono Mixus, 186 and a little bit. Und euch, wenn halt schon bisium hayitzia legamri from Kuf Pei Zayin, and also when he's almost leaving and he's almost no longer 187. Kuf Pei Ches Shono Choser Mixus, he is still 187 years old, but he's not fully 188. So you don't know exactly when he gave birth. But this would still tell us what we want. Why are we telling you the number? So wissen the mispar to know what the years of the world is. Weil the sachakel from the alle mispore hashana shonim. Because then the total of the numbers of the years, when we say how much he lived, is maspir masim to minyan shnei soilom. That fits the number of the years of the world. Choser yeser mixashana, less or more part of the year, which means the number of years, the day of birth doesn't tell us anything really. The day of birth is only helpful to know the total amount of the years, and the total amount of the years goes by to the matches up with the years of the world. So it's a lot of math and explanation over here, but it ends up pretty straightforward, that just at least to remember the rules, that the number is of birth, when a certain person gave birth, isn't really important to us to know how old that person is. The Torah is just saying that so that you'll know how to match it up with the total life, with the person's life, so that which matches the years of the world, so that the math should match, that if he lived before and after this amount of years, then it'll match up with his total number of years, which is the total number, which is the matches with the time of creation, to know us when things happened as we count from creation. Zayin, der Tama Pnimi der Fun, was Teure is Medayik, Benegeya zu Minyan Shnei Soilom. The inner reason that the Torah is specifies specifically how it is the years of the world to know when it happened. But when verstehen behagdim was steht in Medrash, we'll understand it, including what it says in Medrash. As eine von die Miles von Aiden, that one of the greatness, advantage of Yidden is welche Achilles, which is a goy. Hat gerechnet, he considered that as a tam of Zeros Liskayim. He wanted to convert. What was his reasoning? He says, even a child knows how long, how much time there is from the world creation. Everybody knows what year you're at. Bald as the miles from Eden, since that was an advantage of Eden, was erod gerechnet, that he calculated, hat ihm gebracht, zu wollen sich Megayer sein, that brought him to wanting to convert, is verstandig, as seinen nicht meiles in Gödel HaChochma von Eden, that they're not advantaged how smart the Yidden are. Nor meiles was eine verbunden mit das Yisrael, but rather those are advantages connected to Jewish religion, to our religion, because that's a child knows about creation. Is the bir that the emunah in Chiddush Ha'olam, the belief in the world being brought into being, the novel of the world, that it's a created, is eina for the Yesodus from Torah. That's one of the base of Torah. Rambam, in the Rambam's language, that is the root of our belief. One who doesn't believe in this, but and thinks that the world is been there always, he denies the main thing and he doesn't have Torah at all. You have to believe that the world was created by Hashem. In Amunah Gufa Zayin Nobefran Kamadargis. Within Amunah, there is several steps, several levels. As Ken Zayin Azayin, that is Amamin Bemunah Shlema. It's possible that one believes with a complete faith. Und doch fällt bei ihm die Klarkeit davon. And still he lacks the clarity of this. So he believes that. He doesn't have the belief with clear knowledge. Similar to our sages say sometimes, it's different if you just hear it and see it. When a person just hears something, even though he believes, he's certain that it's true, it's not the same when it's true through seeing it. Und das ist der Öfte in them, and this is the novel idea in them, even the minor knows how much there is from the world creation. The Amunah, this belief, which includes the root of belief. The root of belief is that the world was created. That's the root of the belief, as the Ramban says. Is by him it's very clear. Them Zman, when the Eber started Bashaf the Welt. He knows exactly when Hashem created the world. Is Torah Meidich, and for that reason the Torah gets into the great length to tell you the numbers of the generation. Lashmi'enu bediyuk, the mispar to tell you precisely the numbers of the years of the world, because that is part of the das and the clarity, exactly to know everything in the time that was this is designated by the Torah. So the bottom line is, when the Torah sums up, and the question that Rebbe started, when the Torah sums up Noach's years, that it was 950 years, because Noach Taka lived only 950 years. And the fact that he lived before the Mabul 600 was not really 600 before the Mabul. The Mabul didn't happen when it was 600. It happened when he was 599, as the Rebbe brought out before. The years that we count to the destruction of to the Tov Reish Nun Vav, that's also because numbers of years that are mentioned over there means to the approximate. Okay, this is a complicated calculating sikha. It's a little bit Nida got to go it over again. This is not based on a talk. This is Michtavi Sivan Tovshimem Aleph. This is the Rebbe's writings in Tovshimem Aleph that they put together this Sikha.